So how exactly does Scrum work? In the previous topic, we suggested using the example of a community event that Scrum was a way of organizing a group of people to get a job done. And we related it to how we would have someone with a to-do list who knew what needed to get done. We had a group of volunteers who would periodically get together, figure out what they were going to do over the next couple of weeks, and get something done, and ideally maybe have someone facilitating the process and keeping everyone honest and making sure that tempers didn't flare. Well, that's kind of a really good intuitive example of what Scrum's about. But we want to get into a little bit more detail if we're going to organize our software teams to be able to deliver using Scrum. This is the classic so-called Scrum Machine, and I would like to explain how it works by progressively deconstructing it and explaining the components. So, remember the person with the to-do list? In Scrum, that's called the product owner, and that to-do list is called the product backlog. And so the product owner ultimately has responsibility for the value that's delivered by the Scrum team. So, because they have that responsibility, they also get the right to say what order the work on that product backlog or that to-do list will be done in. Each of the items in that backlog I usually call a backlog item. Now, you may have heard the term user story, and I like to think of a user story as one kind of backlog item. So it's a type of backlog item. All the work that the team is going to do, be it defect fixes, investigations, spikes, etc., is all work in the backlog. If it's not in the backlog, then it's not going to get done. If it's in the backlog, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get done. The product owner here has to prioritize it, but we don't want to have off-balance sheet work. So all the work that is going to the team is in that product backlog. The items in the backlog are just that, backlog items, and user stories are one kind of backlog. You will also notice here that if you've seen Scrum drawn up in textbooks, the way that we draw the backlog is a little bit different. In fact, it appears to be upside down. We like to think of the backlog as more like modeling it on a rock crusher, where the highest priority stories are actually at the bottom of this backlog or drawn at the bottom. And as you can imagine, we have sort of big abstract work at the top, the big items, and progressively they get refined until they can be pulled in by the team. So this is, I think, just a much more accurate and appropriate way to draw a backlog. Now, we have a backlog, so we have our to-do list, and it's managed by our product owner. And we have the team who's going to be fulfilling the work. And what the team does is they take an item from the backlog and turn it into an increment. And so the team can take any item from that backlog, or the highest priority item from that backlog, work on it, deliver that increment, which means the team has to have all the skills necessary to pull that item from the backlog and turn it into that increment. And that in Scrum is meaning we organize our teams as cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams that collaborate together. One thing that we do not do in Scrum is try to organize our teams as having a team of BAs, and then having a team of programmers, and then having a team of testers, having a team of release managers, because that defeats the intention behind Scrum. We're looking at a very tight, fast-moving, collaborative team who's fully capable of taking a work from that product backlog and turning it into an increment. Now, the way the team works is they don't directly pull the work from that product backlog. At the beginning of what is commonly called a sprint planning session or their planning session, they will start to pull items, the highest priority items from that product backlog, and put it into what they call their sprint backlog. The sprint backlog, as you can imagine, is like their bucket, or as I've drawn it here, is a box. And it's got a certain size to it. Their team has a capacity to do so much work in an interval. The intervals are called sprints or iterations, but they're a time box. So the team works in a fixed time box. A lot of teams plan in either 2-week time boxes or 4-week time boxes. Some very fast-moving teams work in 1-week time boxes. But what they do is they pull work from the product backlog and place it into their sprint backlog. And that's the work that they are going to tell the product owner, this is what we can commit to getting done by the end of this sprint or iteration. By the way, the term sprint and iteration are often used interchangeably. If you want to be like my demographic, the term iteration is more the classic term, and sprint is if you want to look like you're hip and fashionable. Both mean basically the same thing. So the sprint backlog is the work the team will do. So you can see already here the emerging dynamic in product management and managing the team. The product owner owns the product backlog. The product owner gets to say what their highest priority work is. The team, on the other hand, owns that sprint backlog. And the team gets to say how much work they can take on and commit to delivering within a sprint or iteration. So product owner says what they need to get done. Team can say how much they get done. And at the end of our sprint or iteration, we have what's called the sprint demo. This is where the team shows off all the work that they were able to get done and was accepted by the product owner. Now, very quickly here, I just want to clear up a misconception. A lot of people believe the sprint demo is where the product owner accepts the work. That's not correct. Unfortunately, it ends up being, in a lot of organizations, what happens. But in Scrum, you should be accepting, the product owner should have work being presented to him and accepted all throughout the sprint. But regardless, the sprint demo is intended to be an opportunity to show off the work that the team got done. Ostensibly, it's to get feedback on the work that was accepted and use that information to take into the next planning session. We can see how things are actually working, and maybe that'll twig some new ideas as to what really is valuable in that product backlog. But also the sprint demo is a great opportunity to basically celebrate because you got something done. I know in a lot of organizations I've worked with, sometimes that sprint demo is the Friday afternoon cake party. You had 5 or 6 teams showing off their work. The CEO was there, the company, and the marketing managers, and people were getting a lot of feedback and encouragement. So it really is a fairly useful opportunity to bolster morale on the team. We got something done, and also to get feedback to find out, yeah, what is really important? What are really the most valuable work items from that backlog we should be working on? Another important meeting that's held at the end of the sprint or iteration is the Sprint Retrospective. Whereas the sprint demo was showing off the work that was done in the sprint or iteration, the Sprint Retrospective is an opportunity for the team to review the process itself. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations just sort of treat this as a pro forma, looking at, geez, how did we screw up this time? And really not taking any action on it. This is unfortunately the most powerful aspect of Scrum in my personal opinion, because this is where you're examining the process and asking the question, how do we get better? You're asking questions of the team. What actually worked for us? What's working for us, and how do we get more of that? Or what could we change? What's impeding us, and how can we eliminate those impediments? A lot of high-functioning Scrum teams, what they will do is the output from their sprint retrospective will go into their backlog as well, and they actually spend some time constantly working on improving the way that they work together and deliver work products. You know, some people have said that with Scrum you can get an order of magnitude improvement. Well, you get that by improving the process itself. It's that constant, continuous improvement. You know, you hear people give a lot of lip service to that, but unless you're really paying attention to those retrospectives and focusing on that process, you really aren't going to get the benefits that are promised by Scrum. So we go through all those ceremonies and we repeat them. So we're working continuously in these short time boxes of 1 or 2 or 4 weeks. We're going through the sprint planning, we're delivering, getting work done, delivering increments, doing the sprint demo, doing the sprint retrospective, and repeating this cycle over and over again. Finally, one other meeting that the team has regularly is what's called the Daily Standup. This is a short meeting, often less than 15 minutes, where the team comes together and connects with one another, looking at the progress that's being made on the commitment that they've made, searching for impediments, and also determining if any one of the team member needs help. Because one of the things that's understood, you have to understand in Scrum, this is a team effort. Just because you're succeeding and someone else is flailing does not mean you're successful. The team succeeds and fails together. So if somebody's having difficulty on the team, it is the team's responsibility to help that person get through. And this is the opportunity where people can be honest with themselves. Remember that openness thing? And be honest with themselves such that, are we getting into trouble? What can we do about it? So we're getting this short feedback progressively every day, such that the team can make adjustments to their plan and how they're working together. Finally, we have the Scrum Master, which is a fancy name for a facilitator. A lot of organizations treat this role as a project manager, which is unfortunate because the Scrum Master is really, in many ways, the servant leader. Yes, they do things that a good project manager should do. They're the firefighter, they help remove impediments, but they're not the person who does the planning or imposes a planning on the team. Then, as you've noticed, the team does the planning. The team collaborates on the plan. What the Scrum Master does is help facilitate that process. So they are a facilitator of the meetings. They are the owner of the process. They are a coach to the team. They are a person who's skilled in conflict resolution. They're the person who keeps this team functioning and improving and tries to create the safe space in which this team can function. So that is basically the elements of Scrum and how they work together, such that Scrum, you can use Scrum to organize a group of people to get a job done. And I just want to remind you again, now we looked at this from most people associate Scrum as a software development methodology. Really, look at it as a way of organizing people and organizing the way that we work together. Remember this article I suggested to you, Arlene Sutherland's Scrum in Church. Scrum is really about how do we work together. It doesn't really specify a lot of technical practices. Those you have to provide yourself. That's why you see a lot of Scrum teams often adopting extreme programming practices. But Scrum is really a way of improving the way that people work together to deliver greater value faster.